policies and infrastructure and culture that needs to be in place. And we know that this notion of the engaged university is something that we're seeing growing in all parts of the globe. We're seeing all of these, an indication of that is all these different networks and associations that have been built. Many of these are familiar to many of you, and there are a lot of others as well. And so this has become a global movement. And there are a lot of reasons to that, which I'll talk about in just a second. We also see it in not just in the formation of these associations and networks, but also in publications, and certainly service learning in particular. And service learning has played a very, very important role in advancing the whole notion of engaged university and the engaged university movement that we're seeing across the globe. So with all these publications that we're seeing around service learning and engagement and university engagement and engaged scholarship, all of these things are building momentum and are an indicator of the fact that this has become something very important for higher education institutions. And we're seeing these in English languages, but also in a lot of other languages as well. So this is definitely a global phenomenon, and one that I think is going to be with us for a long time to come. So I'd like to start out by talking about why engagement and why now? Why are we having these conversations, and why is this so important these days? And I think there are a lot of reasons. I think one of the main reasons is that universities today are, and for a while now, have been seen as ivory towers, as elite institutions that sit at the top of the hill, that are very disconnected from society, disconnected from the real world, that we are at universities are part from society rather than a part of society. And that the work that we do is out of touch. A lot of the research we do is not relevant. We produce knowledge and research for academic journals that very few people read, only those in those specialized areas. And the findings that we actually produce in our research don't move into practice. We produce many findings, many understandings, many benefits that could benefit society, but they don't get translated into ways that actually improve practice. And that's certainly true in my field of education, where we learn a lot about ways of teaching better and doing better schooling, but yet a lot of those practices don't get put into practice. So there is a push, external push, to change universities and our relevance in society. And with that, we also see that universities are not very connected to the real realities, even when those realities are right in front of us. That the work that we do is not about changing the society, that it's really just about intellectual interests that we might have or courses that we think are important. And we hear this from employers who say that our students graduate and they're not prepared for the workforce. So there's a lot of pressure, even when those issues are right in front of us. When I was at Berkeley, for example, this isn't Berkeley, by the way, but when I was at Berkeley, we had international experts on homelessness. And they would go around the world talking about homelessness and what a big problem it is. But then all you had to do was cross the street off of our campus in Berkeley, and you'd see homeless people. And the chancellor would say, "What is wrong with this picture? You know, here we are studying this issue, and yet what are we actually? Why are we not doing anything about it?" And I think this is a criticism that we hear a lot about universities, that we have problems and issues and challenges all around us, but we're not really being attentive to them. Another is that I think scholarship is changing. It's really changing in the last 20 years. It's becoming a lot more interdisciplinary. There's more social relevant disciplines that are emerged. Cultural studies, ethnic studies, gay and lesbian studies, racial inequities. And my university, University of Minnesota, as you know, is located in Minneapolis. And many of you I know are familiar with the murder of George Floyd recently and all the protests that came out. That's just a few kilometers from my campus, my university. And these societal issues are becoming more and more important in the scholarship. And we're seeing these societal issues as a discipline becoming more important with our younger faculty and our newer faculty at our university. So scholarship and the issues that are important and how we're approaching scholarship is really changing. And I think another reason why we have a lot of conversation around the engaged university is that we have a lot of rhetoric, a lot of talk about why that our universities are relevant, are important, are advancing the public good. We're doing all these important things to society. But when it comes to actually investing in the programs or supporting our faculty who do this work or making engagement central to what our universities are about, we see that the reality doesn't meet the rhetoric. That we say these things at universities, but when it comes to investments, we don't always see that support. In fact, during this economic crisis, what we're seeing is these are the first programs to get cut and get eliminated from our universities because they're not seen as central. They're seen as the third mission. These are the third mission programs. And so we have to protect the first mission and the second mission. And if we have any money left over, we'll focus on the third mission. And so there's a lot of rhetoric, but not a lot of reality oftentimes. So, and yet, it's very interesting to see how across the globe, universities make big statements about this work. And so putting all these things together, we see that this is a time for change for universities. This is about transforming our higher education institutions. So we make big statements. In a lot of university mission statements, we see statements like we see at the University of Johannesburg, for example, to inspiring communities to transform and serve humanity. Very public purposes in what our universities say they do. Even in Asia, Hong Kong Polytechnic University talks about pursue impactful research that benefits the world to prepare socially responsible citizens. Again, a lot of rhetoric about serving the public good. Certainly in Africa, in Asia, you may have heard this university called Harvard University. So this is a university that tells its students that it's going to foster its students to lead them in later lives to serve society, serve the public purposes, serve the public good. This is my university. I'll add that just to show you that we're no different as a university, that we want to, at the very end, say we're going to produce knowledge to benefit the people of the state, the nation, the world, the galaxy, right? We want to serve everyone and serve the public good. Here's one from Hungary, near your neighbors here. Talk about its charitable activities to influence the local citizens and solidarity towards them, serving the public good. Betka, I'm sorry to pick on your university, but also the university contributes to formation of intelligent, moral, authentic, socially responsible individuals. And I can go on and on and on with universities all over the globe, South America, everywhere, where we say in our rhetoric, in our missions, that we're going to produce knowledge, we're going to benefit society, we're going to produce productive citizens. We have service to the public good. So the question is, or questions are, where does this happen? And how does this happen? Does this happen automatically by the fact that we exist as universities? Or do we need to make it more intentional and more explicit? And that's what being an engaged university is about. It's about making this work intentional, central, and explicit. That's not something we just say we do or take for granted, but we actually make it happen. And so what I'd like to be able to do is talk a little bit about what that means. First of all, we talk about the engagement work and our extension work and our outreach work as the third mission. and it's often called the third mission. And what that means is that it is separate from the first and the second mission, which are research and teaching. And we then say we have this third mission of service and extension. And I would posit that that's actually, first of all, these circles are the same size, which is not true at most universities. Some of these missions are more privileged than others, and I would say at my university, that's the case. The other thing is that these missions overlap, which was not always the case. But this is for illustrative purposes. We have these three missions, and I hope they would be more balanced and more overlapped. But our work with communities, our external communities, really is not just about what happens in that third circle, that service and extension circle, but also the fact that we engage with communities across all parts of our mission. And so being an engaged university is not about thinking of this as a third mission, but really a strategy for doing work across all three missions. And that we can engage with the community in all these different ways. And this letter E is service learning, where we connect the service and teaching missions with our communities. And all of these different ways, these different approaches that are tied to the different parts of the mission become an important part of understanding the engaged university agenda. That it's not just work that's relegated to certain units or certain parts of the university, but rather are part of all aspects of our mission. Another important aspect of this is that we think about this work as not just doing effective extension, but that we do community engaged research. And the reason we do it is to do research of significance that's going to benefit society, like we say in our mission statement. And also to do community engaged teaching, because we know that when students are more engaged in communities, we know this from research, that we actually are doing higher quality teaching, which we all care about. So all of this is about tying it to all parts of our mission. The other important aspect of being an engaged university is that this is more about moving away from projects. And this is how we've tended to do engagement work. We tend to do community projects. An engaged university is one that focuses more on partnerships. It's partnerships with communities where it looks at issues that it wants to address in partnerships, in trusted partnerships that are built on relationships that then together work on these important issues. So it's not the university working on the issues, but the community and the university working together. And you all know this about reciprocity and mutual benefits from service learning. So what are some strategies? Now I'm going to go through this very quickly. And this is a lot from the literature, a lot from experiences and research on what does it take to build an engaged university. And so I'm going to move very quickly about this. And I want to use some examples from my university around these 10 strategies for building the engaged university, just to illustrate how that might look like at a university. So a little bit about my university. As I mentioned, University of Minnesota, we were formed in 1851. We have about 52,000 students. We're a very large university. We have 19 colleges and schools, about 200 degrees, major programs through the doctoral degree. We're very high research intensive. We have a very large research footprint, and that's a very big circle in our mission. And there's a lot of emphasis on that. And we have a lot of identities at my university because we are a public university. We have a lot of degree programs, so we're this very robust institution of higher learning. As I mentioned, we're a research university. We're also an urban university. We're located in a big city. And all of those parts of our identity are very important because how we do engagement, with whom we partner, how we go about understanding what the purpose of engagement, our engagement with the public and society is, shifts from all these as we look at these different parts of our identity. Doing engagement as an institution of higher learning around our degree programs involves certain kinds of partnerships. When we do it around research, it's a different kind of partnership. When we do it around what it means to be a metropolitan urban university, it's a very different set of purposes, very different set of partnerships. And so thinking about what is our institutional identity and where are the different, how does community and public engagement help advance each parts of that identity? This is very important in building that engaged university. Because sometimes we say, well, we do it because we're a public university. No, we do it because we also have these other identities as well. We should not relegate it to one part of our identity. Tolulope? Is that you? No? Okay. Anyway, so let me just talk about these 10 strategies. Very first thing is to define the it. We say we want to institutionalize it. We want to institutionalize engagement. What is the it? Institutions that are engaged universities have a clear definition of what it is that they want to achieve and what it means to be engaged, what engagement means. So for example, at my university, we've made that very clear, and this is our university's definition. We use the term public engagement. But if you look at this definition in blue, it's about public and private. In green, it's to enrich scholarship and research, so we tie it to our research. In red, we tie it to our teaching. It's also tied to our extension and service mission. So we make it very clear in our definition, it's tied to all aspects of our mission. So the first piece of being an engaged university is having a definition. This is important and it's key because we cannot institutionalize it if we don't know what it is. And so thinking about what does this mean for your university to be able to have this definition? What is the definition for your institution? And this is important because when we say the term engagement, it means a lot of different things. And it gets very confusing. So for example, here are some publications. Student engagement in higher education, student engagement in the digital university, I'm engaged, enhanced student engagement on campus. And many publications like this talk about engagement. However, these are not about community engagement. And so when we use the term engagement, it's very confusing and people don't understand what it means. So having a clear definition, understanding what the purposes are for engagement at our institution as it ties to the identity and the mission is critical. And this is where we need to start. And universities that are very engaged universities have clear definitions of what engagement is for and about. So that's the first strategy, is having that definition. And as a institutional officer, I rely on that definition to guide the engagement agenda. The second strategy is to establish the value proposition. And this is important because we have to understand why. Why should we focus on engagement? We have so many other priorities. The university has a lot of other priorities. Why engagement? Why should this be a priority? We have to explain those things. Research and teaching are priorities, and they need to take precedence. Those are the important things. And extension is a good thing to do, but we have to think about our research and teaching. And now with the pandemic, we're seeing where engagement fits in. We're seeing that even though we should be supporting our society, we're not being very engaged. And these are programs that actually are being cut out of our budgets. or we're already doing a lot of engagement. So why should we do more of it? So we have to be able to answer this question. And so what we have tried to do was try to say the following. We tried to say, well, our National Science Foundation, this is our federal agency that funds a lot of our research. The federal agency, the United States federal agency that funds a lot of the science research, is telling us we need to have societally relevant outcomes. We need to engage with our societies, increase our partnerships with industry, with academia, with communities, with others. So in order for us to be a research university and get research grants, we have to be more engaged. That's the reason. Certainly also with another federal agency, Anthony Fauci, he's been in the news, he's with the National Institutes of Health. Again, they tell us community participation is important. So for us to be successful as a research university, we have to be more engaged. This is the why. This is the value prospect. Another reason is that we ask students, to what extent do you agree with this comment? Opportunities to connect my academic work with community-based experience are important to me. This is a question we ask our undergraduate students. We have about 1,200 students who respond to this, and about 85% of the students say they agree or strongly agree with this. So we use these data to say, this is another reason why we have to have engagement. Our students want this. This is a way to recruit.
Okay. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Yes, but not Professor Furco.
Not on the note.
Yes.
That is actually good. I am glad you can hear me.
You're not alone.
Just a second, he will come back, I'm sure.
Hello, I'm back.
Okay.
I'm very sorry.
No, it's okay. That's just a technical issue. Okay.
So, having the value prospect is very, very important. Okay, I'm just explaining why. Why do you want engagement at your university? Why is it important? The third piece is, so you want engagement, what's the plan? Being an engaged university means there's a clear plan for moving forward. And this is where I think a lot of universities don't advance as engaged universities, because there's no plan. It's not about more projects. It's not about more programs. That's not going to build an engaged university. And having a clear plan becomes key to be able to move forward. So for example, we've established a plan that has important things that we have to critically look at. We took stock of what is it? What are the policies? What is the infrastructure? What's the culture that we have to change? We don't need more programs. We have too many programs, actually. But what is it going to move us and transform our institution to one that's going to be engaged? So thinking about your institution and what are the pieces, the culture, the policies. For example, we need to look at how we reward our faculty, what it means to do engaged scholarship and the value of that work. We need to think about how we do accounting of this work so that we can really tell the story. We have to think about how we engage our students more fully. So thinking about what is it at our universities that's going to transform our institutions. So having a plan is very, very important and key. And so scholarly value, for example, was one thing that one of the 10 parts of our plan. So we identified a vision statement of where do we want to go with that? And thinking about where is it that you want to go with each of these things, being clear on what your university, our universities are going to look like when they are engaged. What's that vision? And then thinking strategically, step by step, how we can get there. The next important piece is to build an engaged university, we have to take the long view. We are not going to transform our universities in a year or two or 3 or 4 or 5. So taking the long view, having that plan of what is it going to take step by step to move forward. It takes 15 to 20 years to institutionalize community engagement in higher education. This is something where we have a concerted effort. It takes many, many years. And I know this could be frustrating for many of us that work in higher education institutions, but we are transforming our universities. We're changing the way we do business, the way we look at the work that we do. We're shedding this ivory tower. And so this takes a long time and it takes a concerted effort. And I like this quote in terms of the pace of higher education. It's somewhere between sluggish, which means very, very slow, to glacial, like a glacier, right? Very slow. So thinking long-term and having a step-by-step process. At my university now, we started in 2000, early 2000s. And every year we've made a little bit of progress towards building that engaged university. Starting with a definition in 2004, having a senior level position, a vice presidential position, 2005, then having a definition and then moving to promotion and tenure guidelines in 2007, then having a plan in 2008, and on and on. So this has been a 20-year journey at my university, and we still have a long way to go. And we've made a lot of investments, a lot of culture change, changing the way we reward our faculty, whom we hire, how we teach our courses, the investments we make, but we still have a long way to go. So taking that long view is very important to building that engaged university. It's not going to happen by adding programs only. The fifth strategy is to focus on institutional goals. And this is, I think, a very important piece of the puzzle. The goal is not to do community engagement. The goal is not to do community engagement. That's not the goal. Community engagement, service learning are strategies to advance the institutional goals. The more that we can tie community engagement work to institutional goals, the more likely they will be embedded into the culture of the institution. So for example, here are some goals at my university, institutional goals, have nothing to do with community engagement. We want to, at the top, internationalize. We want an international global footprint. We're the University of Minnesota, but we want to be an international university, right? We want to have more research dollars. We want to improve our relationships with communities. We want to develop the workforce. We want to keep our students. We want to retain them. We want to strengthen students' learning. We want to address big issues in society. These are all big goals for the university. There are a lot of investments made in this. So the strategy is, well, how might community engagement help achieve these important institutional goals? By doing community engagement, we can become more international. We can do economic development. We can retain our students. We can get more research dollars, etc. So think about, what are your university's big goals? What are the things that the rectors and the chancellors and the presidents talk about? And then think, how can community engagement help achieve those goals? That makes community engagement important and valuable. And that helps embed it into that culture. And engaged universities have found ways to do this very well. So community engagement is not a third mission that's over here. It's not something you do if you want to do it, but it becomes something important because it helps advance the institutional goals. Right? Another important strategy. So the other thing that we need to do is appreciate the levels of engagement. And I say this because those of us who are in this community engagement and service learning field can be very critical of others who perhaps are not as immersed or engaged as we are, who do this every day. So I hear this from colleagues who say, well, that's not engagement. There's no mutual benefit. There's no reciprocity. There's no meaningful service. So that's not engagement. Well, when we do that, what happens is that we then tell people, well, then the work you want to do is not engagement. Even though you're connecting with communities, that's not engagement. And we have to be very careful about that, because those of us who do this work every day understand what quality, high quality, deep engagement means. But those who only do this as something that's just one part of what they do, don't necessarily achieve that level of depth in engaged work right away. So we have to work with people to get to that deeper level. And I think this is very important because we have to appreciate these levels of engagement, that some disciplines, some scholars are going to do work for communities. They're not necessarily going to go into the community or work with the community. They're just going to do it for the community. We should consider that part of our engagement agenda, that they're thinking about society, they're thinking about communities, as opposed to being that ivory tower with the gate. So embrace that as part of the engagement agenda. Don't push it away. And we see this a lot in our engagement field. And that has implications for research agendas, that we might do research in the public interest. That's a very less engaged way, but nonetheless, it is a step in the engagement arena. We want to embrace that and then work with those to move towards that higher level of engagement. So again, embrace those levels of engagement becomes very, very important. I'm working with people in chemistry, another place that would say to me, we can't do engagement. If I would say, well, you have to do reciprocity and mutual benefits, they never would even try. So starting where they are in that continuum of engagement becomes important. Okay, so 4 more. It's very important as an engaged university to make sure that we count and we measure and assess of what is going on. This is very important for building a critical mass. Telling stories are very important, but data become very powerful for building an engaged university. Institutional leaders want to see data, and it's critical that we collect data and tell and show data, and not just tell the stories. The stories are very powerful, but the data become very critical for building that engaged universities. So for example, some of the things that we've done are student surveys. As I mentioned, we collect data and we use those data to say, look, our students want these things, and this is a way to recruit our students and to keep students. We do these heat maps, these Google maps, to show exactly where the university is around the world. We want to be a global university. We can show by the engagement work that we are becoming an international global university. And then these other things like we had a metrics task force, for example, to collect some information. We took a look at the items where data are being collected and embedded engagement items. And I'll just give you a quick example. So when faculty or anyone needs to submit a proposal for research, so research is very important for our university. Every research project has to go through a form. You submit it that has to get approved by the university. We added an item that asks, are you connecting this to the community? Is this research connected to the community? If so, with what kind of entity, and what is the role of that community member or partner? So every project that goes out, we're collecting this information. So what does this information tell us after we add it up? Well, we know that in 1 year, in 4-year period, we had 1,525 research proposals submitted to grants that totaled 1.4 billion US dollars. It's a lot of money that were submitted. And then a group of them were awarded, actually got money. And out of those, 697 were community engaged. That's $500 million of proposals that were funded with community engagement. So the argument then that I can make is that by doing community engaged and when it's community partnered, we actually can be successful in our research enterprise because it helps us get the research grants. So having these data are very powerful. When our Board of Regents saw this, they were very impressed by this and said, oh, okay, we need to do more of this, right? So these data become important. Similarly with our students, this is our student trends over 7 years. 84, 85, 86% of our students say that they value this work and it's important to them. These data become very powerful. And engaged universities use these data very strategically to change that culture, change that infrastructure to support the institution. Okay. The other important thing is to secure internal alignment to build a critical mass. One of the things that we hear often is that I'm the only one in my unit that does this work. I'm not rewarded for this work. We're the only people at the university who do this work. And so we have these different groups that we build to connect with each other, whether they're scholars, whether they're in a particular neighborhood that are working together, or whether they're working on similar topics. So think about ways to connect. For example, we said, are you working in the arts and community engagement? And then we provided space for all those doing arts-related engagement that didn't talk to each other or speak to each other before, come together and start to see some affinities. Certainly, and all these other issues as well. This helps build that critical mass. That's very important. That's that first stage of institutionalization, is building a critical mass. Because we're so siloed and independent in universities, we don't work together very well. And the more that we can bring together those units that are doing similar work, whether it's in a particular geography or in a different discipline, or scholars who do this work, or others who perhaps are teaching with community engagement, building those affinities and bringing folks together becomes really important. Okay, and just in a couple of minutes, I want to end this for some questions. So it's very important then to think about policies. There are many policies in higher education that get in the way of being able to do this work. It becomes very, very difficult. And so it's very important to have some kind of council, some kind of policy group that's going to tackle these important impediments. Liability becomes an issue. Safety of minors is very big in the US, where if researchers or others or students are going out and working with young kids, how we reward our faculties, how we brand our work. We have policies that we cannot, no other logo can be next to our university logo. But if we're doing community partnered work that's co-produced and co-investigated, whose logo gets to go on there, right? So we have to have a policies for co-branding this work. We're a public university, we're secular. Well, we work with faith-based institutions. What's allowed, what's not allowed? These are policies and issues and many others that can get in the way of doing engagement work, where people say, it's too bureaucratic, the university won't let us. Think about what are the policies that need to be addressed at the university and have an entity that can address those. This is really key. Engaged universities have these kinds of advisory groups, policy-making groups that change those. And last but not least, is to establish a reward system for engaged scholarship. This is perhaps the biggest impediment to building an engaged university. That there's no rewards for, a lot of rewards for faculty are not to do this work. In fact, it's to not do this work. And having an opportunity to think about promotion and tenure reward systems, what kinds of publications count, what kind of research count. We're all into impact factors now. Everything has to be in an impact factor journal and peer reviewed and all of that. And that's very important. But it's also important to say, so what? What impact did your research do for society? And again, it's going back to that mission and living out that mission. And having these reward systems. We changed our promotion tenure guidelines in 2007. We established a presidential award that is important. On our university, we have what's called the Scholars Walk, with a place where these stations are there with all the awards in the world that people get, Nobel Prizes and other big things. And we developed one for community engaged scholarship. That's our provost and our president, and I'm the tall one there. So that's the Engaged Scholarship Award. Having a physical, visual presence of this becomes very, very important. It's very prestigious, and it becomes a statement, a symbol that this is important. So these are our promotion and tenure guidelines. Every faculty member must talk about how their work is advancing significance and value to society, and how their teaching is also in connecting to persons outside of the university. And these are big steps to take to begin to build that engaged agenda. So I'm going to stop here to ask you some questions. But here, here are our questions here. Let me stop sharing. Okay, so questions. I know I went through that very quickly, but those 10 things are very, very important to building that engaged university. And so I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay,